It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
All right. Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm your host here this morning. And you're joining us in the middle of our program. We're in our third out of four segments. Earlier on, we talked about the L.A. Sheriff's Department implementing Big Brother by putting Compton, California, under the 10-square-mile city of Compton, under total surveillance, monitoring the city and the cars and the people within it with surveillance drones for an entire block of time. 24/7, not 365, but 24/7 surveillance. And then having the unmitigated gall to come out and say, well, they'll get used to it. That's like saying, I don't know what you're worried about. Just get used to bank robbery. It's acceptable. Just get used to murder. It's acceptable. It's a crime. It's a crime. We don't get used to that. And it's a crime against all of us. Not someone you could look at and say, well, there's a reason for us to be sympathetic to law enforcement because this particular individual was so egregiously outside the boundaries of social limits. We're not all there. They were monitoring average, everyday citizens, not guilty of anything other than just trying to live their peasant little peon lives in the eyes of these people. But all of them subject to 24-hour-a-day monitoring. The admissions and the statements that sheriff and his deputy made should now be used as a physical criminal charge against them. Our second segment, we covered John Boehner and his one chance to redeem himself on Benghazi. If he doesn't do the select committee right, it'll be a whitewash. We'll never get the answers we need. And I made a couple of points about the things that absolutely must happen in order for it to be successful. One, unlimited subpoena power across the board. Doesn't matter who you are, nobody gets a break. Two, the committee has to be able to recommend, or not recommend, but create and charge the individuals who are responsible if any criminal activity has been found, and charge them directly without sending them through Eric Holder, because we know that if Eric Holder is ever involved, nothing will happen, as we saw with the IRS and so forth and so on. And then the last issue is that the hearings can't be done in secret. In this topic, we're going to talk about the federal land grab that should be met with militia resistance. The federal government is again looking to expand their takeover of the nation. And they're doing it, at the behest of these environmental extremists. But since they can't get it pushed through Congress, they're going to do it in a backdoor manner, and they're going to do it by federal overreach and executive order. That's dictatorial. That's banana republic territory, ladies and gentlemen, and it's inexcusable that we should stand here and allow it. They can call it a national monument. It's a lie. What it is a federal land grab. And this nation should be prepared to stand up and say, we're going to fight back against that, just like we fought back against the BLM on the Clive and Bundy thing. Militias around the country should be willing to stand up and say, this is state land, private land, and you're not welcome here. State governments should be passing legislation, drop everything else, and pass state legislation that says not only is all future government, federal government usurpation and theft of private state land illegal and untolerated, but all heretofore previous examples are null and void. That's it. Look, when you have Nevada 84% owned by the federal government, Alaska 69% owned, Utah 57, Oregon 53, Idaho 50, Arizona 48, California 45, Wyoming 42, New Mexico 41, Colorado 36, Washington State 30%, and Montana 30% owned by the federal government. You have to ask yourself this question. Did the founders ever anticipate or intend for the federal government to permanently own and control land in the United States of America? No. No. In fact, the federal government is prohibited specifically from ownership of property outside of the 10 square miles of Washington, D.C., and that area that is pre-allowed based upon the need for forts, magazines, and depots, which would be, military bases around the country. That's it. That's it. Owning 84% of Nevada, 70% of Alaska, 57% of Utah was never, ever in the cards. And irrespective of whatever rationale is used by the federal government to justify the actions of what they are doing, it makes no difference. I mean, there are people out there who will say, well, wait a minute now. If that was the case, Yosemite National Wilderness Area wouldn't be a federal, a national park, and we wouldn't have. Well, I'm not suggesting that that's good or bad. But I'm saying that you don't justify 99.9% evil by the 0.01% that comes out of it that's not. And honestly, there are ways to designate national treasure monuments without giving the ownership to the federal government. Even if they're state and they cover multiple state, if they cross over a border. I'm not saying it would be easy, but I'm saying to you that just because it's hard for two states to get together and say, okay, let's create this multi-state, park area, doesn't give you the justification to say, let's just let the federal government do it where the rules don't apply anymore, because now you're admitting openly that our Constitution is meaningless, that the intent of the founders is not being followed. You're acquiescing and agreeing and participating in tyranny because you're too weak as a state to say, we'll sit down and do what's necessary. Frankly, there should be, this idea of state ownership of land in some of these large park areas is probably not such a great idea either. The proof of this, by the way, is how little federal land is owned in the original 13 colonies. I mean, if you look at how much land is owned out of the original 13 colonies, It's so little, it's almost unworthy of mention. Why is that? Because that was what the founders controlled at the time. And their attitude was over our dead body. And they meant it. Unlike most Americans who were sitting there saying, as long as you keep the check going and the cable TV on, my free phone ringing, I don't really care what you do. Thomas Jefferson himself told us, in fact, he went beyond, he wasn't just telling us, he was insisting, because he was fighting this battle at the time, he insisted that the federal government dispose of all federal lands. And he stated very emphatically, this is his quote, not mine, never after, in any case, revert to the United States. Hey, folks, we don't get any more blunt than that, do we? Now, of course, any one of our politicians, left or right, could sit there and take that same statement and drag it out into a 10-minute dissertation that would absolutely say nothing. But Jefferson came right out inside and said, and their language was far flowerier than ours, far more garrulous than ours. Never after, in any case, revert to the United States. Illinois in 1828 had a congressman by the name of Joseph Duncan, and he reminded Congress of the duty to dispose of federally held property, because this has been an ongoing problem that's been being fought, not only by the government itself because they want the property, but because they make it available to the special interests who they benefit from, right? Here's what he said. If these lands are to be withheld, which is the effect of the present system, in vain may the people of these states expect the advantages of well-settled neighborhoods, so essential to the education of youth. Those states will, for many generations, without some change, be retarded in endeavors to increase their comfort and wealth by means of works of internal improvement, because they have not the power, incident to all sovereign states, of taxing the soil, to pay for the benefits conferred upon its owner by roads and canals. When these states stipulated not to tax the lands of the United States until they were sold, they rested upon the implied engagement of Congress to cause them to be sold within a reasonable time. No just equivalent has been given those states for a surrender of an attribute of sovereignty so important to their welfare and to an equal standing with the other states. In other words, his argument was, if the states can't tax the property because the federal government owns them, those states are impeded from being able to generate taxable revenue streams from that land were it sold to individuals to build a home on, as an example, or to build a factory or whatever, where wealth would be generated, which would in turn affect and benefit the community and the state itself by employment, by the raising of the lifestyle of the individuals within those states, etc., and by the taxation for schools and so forth and so on. So essentially, by robbing the individual states of the benefits of being able to tax those properties, the federal government has actually created an implied engagement that would stifle growth in those states. One wonders why the per capita population is so low in the West. Well, one of the reasons why is because in some cases, in Nye County, Nevada, 90% of all the land in the county is owned by the federal government. 90. I mean, folks, there's something desperately wrong with that. And those western states are forever barred from having the same equivalent standing as those eastern states that don't have any federally held property. You see, the problem we have is a federal government completely out of control. They already own vast swaths of this property out there. The president has been getting a lot of pressure and sending all the right signals to his constituencies, his lobbying constituencies, that he's going to do the unthinkable, and that is name a group of these areas as conservation and national monument locations. And the reason he's going to call them national monuments is because he can't get Congress to designate them. And so rather than waiting for Congress, as he's been implying and flat out telling us all along, he's going to take action unilaterally. I got to tell you, we're talking about, huge areas. The article here in St. Louis Tribune says Obama has already named a handful of monuments across the country using his unilateral power under the 1906 Antiquities Act and has promised more. Quote, I will use my authority to protect more of our pristine federal lands for future generations. I'm sorry, but to protect more of our pristine federal land? It's not federal land now, and it won't be unless you steal it. Senator Orrin Hatch says, it makes me worry that the president will just ignore the wishes of the people of Utah and just do what he wants. Sometimes he does act unilaterally. Not sometimes. It seems like every action lately is unilateral. Have you not noticed, ladies and gentlemen? Act after act after act after act after act. Not for any reason other than that Congress is not moving fast enough to please his honor. You got to be kidding me. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the president has the right to unilaterally act as a dictator or to pass law himself because Congress doesn't act fast enough. What he was referring to when he was talking about Clinton, Orrin Hatch, was that 2 months before Clinton was reelected in '96, he stood on the rim of the Grand Canyon and declared that 1.8 million acres of public land in Utah was going to be called the new Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. And as a result, it canceled a planned coal mine that was being developed there. And according to Hatch, he calls it the mother of all land grabs. He declared back then, like the attack on Pearl Harbor, this massive proclamation came completely without notice to the public. The biggest presidential land set aside in almost 20 years was a sneak attack. Now, Congress since 2010 has only passed one bill that designated wilderness area. And I got to tell you, folks, the whole idea, the whole premise of wilderness area is an advancement of the Agenda 21 principle that the entire western part of the country with the lowest levels of population, the lowest concentrations of it, the lowest concentrations of wealth, will be turned into these vast wilderness areas, wildlands, if you will, and the people will be pushed out into these larger population center locations that will have connections to each other, but only through wilderness areas. It's the principle of the king's land. You know, you can travel from village A to village B, and you can walk along the king's road to get from village A to village B, but if you go off the path, you're now on the king's land. And God forbid you do anything like shoot a rabbit or a deer so that you can feed your family who happens to be starving while you're on your way to Village B to find some work, and you're subject to being drawn and quartered. Hello? Congress passed one bill since 2010, 32,500 acres of sand dunes in Michigan. There's a lot of others that have been stalled. But the truth of the matter is this. Every one of them should be met with total, absolute, unfailing resistance by the residents of each and every state that is covered. It is inexcusable. It is illegal. It is unconstitutional. It is unethical. It is immoral. And it is against the grain. The federal government has no ownership interest in anything other than 10 square miles in Washington, D.C. That was the intent. The growth of federal government is dramatically impacted by its growth of land outside of there. The influence on these states is so severe because of this massive land ownership. The states are independently robbed of the opportunity to turn that land into something that would benefit the residents of the state. And frankly, you know, you're allowing the dragon to coerce and assume more gold. I mean, anybody read The Hobbit? You remember The Hobbit? You know, the dragon Smaug, he lived under the mountain, and he kicked all the dwarves out of the mountain or whatever because they had all this gold in there. And he couldn't spend any of the gold because he's a dragon. But all he did was lay around in it and swim in it like it was water. It's the same thing with the federal government. There's absolutely no use for it. Meanwhile, the country's in tatters. The people are starving. But Smaug gets to swim in an ocean of gold. The only reason for the federal government to take over massive hunks of land like this is to impact negatively, well, and to additionally advance their position that they are in control of all 50 states. To enhance Agenda 21. That's the goal, folks. Everything else you hear is lies and propaganda. And that's it. You're listening to America's Voice Now. When we come back, we're going to talk about arms trafficking by the national government has reached a global criminal enterprise level. All right, you're listening to America's Voice Now. You can communicate with me directly by sending me email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. Make sure that you visit Battery Station in West Plains. You can find their website at batterystation.com. That's batterystation.com, the largest purveyor of batteries in the nation, shipping all over the country and all over the world. They also have tons of tactical gear and all kinds of things that's not on their website. For a complete list of those things or to inquire about something specific you're looking for, you can give them a call at 417-257-7799. It's 417-257-7799. We'll be back in just a moment.